Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something really cool. We are going to uncover the actual mechanics of global wealth. Have you ever wondered why some nations just seem to thrive, with an absolute abundance of goods, services, and cutting-edge healthcare, while others are really struggling with poverty? Well, we're going to take a data-driven approach, look under the hood of the global economy, and decode exactly what drives production and growth. So, let's fire up the engine.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the global wealth gap, then look at the power of productivity, the four pillars of productivity, policies for economic growth, and finally, something called the catch-up effect. All right, Section 1, the global wealth gap.
We've got to begin with the stark reality of our modern world. When you look across the globe, the massive differences in living standards between nations are, well, quite frankly, they're staggering. To put this into perspective, let's look at some data from 2014. The average American had an income of about $55,000. But in that exact same year, the average person in Mexico earned about $17,000, in China it was $13,000, and in Nigeria, just $6,000. This massive income disparity basically sets up the core mystery we're solving today. Why do some countries absolutely thrive, while others endure a much more meager existence?
And this gap isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. An income difference like that translates directly into your tangible quality of life. Citizens in higher income countries literally have more televisions, more cars, better nutrition, far superior healthcare, and ultimately a significantly longer life expectancy. It's really the difference between merely surviving and having the actual resources to thrive. Moving on to Section 2, the power of productivity. So what explains these massive differences over time and across borders? Well, the answer is the master key to our whole economic mystery, and it can be summed up in one absolutely crucial word: productivity. Productivity is simply the amount of goods and services produced by each unit of labor input. Think of Robinson Crusoe, stranded on his island, right? If he figures out how to catch more fish per hour, his standard of living immediately goes up. He eats better, or he can use that saved time to make better clothes. And the exact same rule applies to entire nations. Basically, almost all the variation we see in living standards comes down to differences in a country's productivity. If workers can produce a massive amount of goods per hour, the nation enjoys a high standard of living. It is the real hero behind rising incomes over the past century. Which brings us to Section 3, the four pillars of productivity. Okay, so seeing the link between living standards and productivity is really just step one. The natural next question is, what actually makes one worker more productive than another? Well, there are four critical building blocks here: physical capital, human capital, natural resources, and technological knowledge. Let's break these down. So the crucial point is that workers are vastly more productive when they have the right tools. That's physical capital, the stock of equipment and structures used to produce goods and services. If you're running an apple orchard, it's the ladders, the trucks, the storage buildings, and the trees themselves. Capital is actually an accumulation of goods produced in the past that we're using today to make new goods. I mean, think about it. Giving a worker a bulldozer instead of a hand shovel completely transforms their output, right? Then we have the second pillar, which is a bit less tangible but equally vital: human capital. This is just the economist's term for the knowledge and skills workers acquire through education, training, and experience. And what's really fascinating here is that students are essentially workers whose current job is producing the human capital that's going to be used in the future. Just like a physical machine, human capital is a produced factor of production. It requires heavy investment, teachers, libraries, time, and it acts as a massive driver for future wages. Our third pillar is natural resources. These are the inputs provided directly by nature. They can be renewable, like a forest where you can plant a new seedling after cutting down a tree, or non-renewable, like oil, which obviously takes millions of years to form. Now, having natural resources is a huge advantage. Just look at the oil-rich nations in the Middle East. But are they strictly necessary for a high standard of living? Surprisingly, no. Japan is one of the richest countries in the world despite having very few natural resources. They just import what they need and export manufactured goods. It perfectly proves that international trade can brilliantly overcome resource scarcity. The fourth pillar is technological knowledge. This is society's understanding of the absolute best ways to produce things. It ranges from Henry Ford inventing the assembly line all the way to proprietary secrets like the Coca-Cola recipe. But wait, how is this actually different from human capital? Well, think of it this way. Technological knowledge is the quality of society's textbooks. Human capital is the amount of time the population actually spends reading those textbooks.
You need the knowledge to exist in the first place, for sure, but you also need a workforce trained to actually use it.
And this brilliantly illustrates how all these killers come together in what economists call the production function. Y is our total output. The F shows how our inputs, labor, physical capital, human capital, and natural resources are combined. But look at A sitting out there in the front. A represents our available technological knowledge. As technology improves, A rises, literally multiplying the effectiveness of all the other inputs. It is the ultimate multiplier for economic growth.
All right, Section 4, Policies for Economic Growth.
Now that we know the 4 building blocks of productivity, how can a government actually pull these levers to accelerate growth and raise living standards? Well, there are a few vital things they can do. They can encourage saving and investment, basically moving resources away from current consumption to create more capital goods. They can foster education to build up that human capital. They absolutely must maintain strict property rights and political stability so investors actually feel safe. They can allow free trade, which, as we saw with Japan, is essentially a technology that turns exported goods into imported resources. And finally, they can promote research and development. In many ways, knowledge is a public good. Once someone discovers a new idea, society can freely use it. So things like R&D grants and patent systems are incredibly powerful tools for growth. But this brings us to a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive paradox. If saving money and building more physical capital increases productivity, can a country just keep buying more equipment to guarantee sky-high economic growth forever?
Actually, the answer is no. And it's because of a principle called diminishing returns. Here is the reality of the situation. As the stock of capital rises, the extra output produced from an additional unit of capital starts to fall. Imagine a worker who has absolutely no tools. Giving them a high-tech machine causes their productivity to completely skyrocket. But if a worker already has a massive state-of-the-art factory at their disposal, handing them just one more machine barely moves the needle. Which leads us perfectly into Section 5, the catch-up effect.
Now, what's really interesting about this mathematical reality of diminishing returns is that it leads directly to a surprising twist ending for the global economy. We call it the catch-up effect. Because of diminishing returns, poorer nations actually have a structural mathematical advantage when it comes to growth rates. Think about it. Because workers in poor countries lack even rudimentary tools, a very small amount of capital investment can substantially raise their productivity. Meanwhile, in rich countries where capital per worker is already incredibly high, that exact same investment has a relatively tiny effect. So, controlling for other variables, the math dictates that poor countries tend to grow at much faster rates than rich countries. They are constantly trying to catch up. So we've basically decoded the engine of wealth, from the raw inputs of human and physical capital all the way to the massive multipliers of technology. But understanding these rules is really just the beginning. As rapid technological advancements continue to spread across borders and the catch-up effect accelerates emerging economies, I want to leave you with this thought. How will these shifting building blocks reshape the global map of wealth over the next century? Will the wealth gap finally narrow, or will new technologies just create entirely new divides? Keep exploring those questions, and I really hope this explainer changed the way you view the world around you. Thanks for joining me.